It's good to be with you again. We are beginning our second week of our monthly practices in Step by Step. We spent the first couple of months talking about the foundational steps, and we'll talk about that some more today. But the foundational steps, if they're to be healthy and create a healthy, vigorous spiritual life for us, have to lead us somewhere. And so this month, this is the place where we're being led. We have a scripture, that's our scripture for the month, that says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." And this is guiding us and leading us in the examination of our relationship to our possessions. So we have a quote of the month that really helps me focus on the question at hand. And that quote says this: "The simple way to know whether you possess your things or whether they possess you is to imagine yourself without them."
Jesus begins the Beatitudes by saying things like, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." You know, to me, this kind of feels like Jesus is a little bit of a downer. I want happy Jesus. Can't Jesus just be happy? And can't we all just be happy?
Can't we all just get along?
Can't we all just get along? I don't even know that I want to admit that there are those who are poor and those who are mourn and those who are meek. I like happiness. I like goodness.
Well, I do too, and I think Jesus does too. I hope so.
I hope so.
Sometimes people get frustrated and say, "Can't we just all get along?" as if that's some kind of smart aleck statement. And my response is, well, sure. There's no reason why we can't. Often these scripture passages have been used in what I think is an inappropriate way, as an exaltation of poverty or an exaltation of mourning or an exaltation of scarcity. But I don't think that's what it means at all. Actually, in some translations, the Good News Bible and others, it says, "Happy are those." And that's a good translation of the word. It's a complicated word. The word blessed means to recognize God's good intentions toward us. So the poor can recognize God's good intentions toward them, and the promises are extraordinary. And so the promises go like this: "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those that mourn, they'll be comforted. Blessed are the meek will inherit the earth." That's huge. What could be bigger than inheriting the earth? "Blessed are those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness." Why? Well, because they'll be filled. So these are promises of great abundance, but we can't receive these things until we first acknowledge our place of poverty, until we acknowledge the loss that causes us to mourn, until we acknowledge what we're hungry for. And to say that the abundance and the blessing is withheld till we make this acknowledgement is not to say that it's a punishment. It's just saying that we'll fill those places with something else. And Angie, what does our culture try to fill these holes with?
Well, often not with God and God's presence. I think our culture has something very different, a very different message to offer us. Our culture teaches us that all these places of poverty and meekness and hunger can be filled with rampant consumption. So we think about the messages that we receive from our culture in terms of consumption. Let's think about how we consume automobiles.
Okay.
So you and Ian each have a car.
We do. We have two automobiles.
Sam and I each have a car. And what our culture would tell us is that the moment we bought those cars, they were no longer good enough.
You know, I like my car, and I bought it in 2007, and in 2008, the same car came out, and within the dash, it had an in-dash GPS. I bought one for $150 and I stick with a rubber thing on the windshield. And I immediately thought, I'd like an in-dash GPS. That would be cool. But I'm not selling my car.
Well, but our culture tells us you need that in order to be happy. And so you should sell your car or trade it in or whatever and go into debt to have the newer model, right? I mean, that's clearly what we're told.
Because it's a matter of health and safety. I can get lost in the city and terrible things can happen.
You could. It would be awful. But you should probably not replace your Subaru with the next model of Subaru, because if we think about the messages that we receive about the cars themselves, think about the advertisements that you see for cars like the Ford Focus, like the Honda Civic, like the Nissan Sentra. Those advertisements are all, they all make those cars seem like they're just kind of ho-hum cars that'll get you to your place where you need to go with
if
good
you can't
safety
afford
ratings.
anything else. Yeah.
Right. And really, what do we need a car for? We need it to get us from one place to the next. So they're perfect cars. But really, if you want to be someone or get somewhere in style, then really you need to have a Cadillac or a Lexus, which are equally great cars.
Yeah, great cars.
But they'll fill that hunger in a little bit better way than the Subaru might.
They will, and they even imply that if I drive that car, that people will think so much differently of me. The pretty girl will want to ride with me. Of course, I'm married to Ann, so the pretty girl already rides with me, and I'm in a great spot anyway. But still, it's not bad to be noticed. It's not a bad.
Right. So let's think about another point of consumption and the way our culture tells us to consume.
Okay.
We all possess something else, not just stuff. We all are the possessors of our time.
Yes.
And our culture tells us and sends us messages that that because we are so in control of our time, we need to fill it. We need to fill it with whatever we can. We need activities to consume our time, and too often those activities also start to consume our life.
You know what the primary lesson, one of the primary lessons and one of the primary objections to Sabbath keeping is that Sabbath keeping is wasted time. And the response is, yes, it is. And that wasted time renews our spirit, renews our soul. It's the most important time. If our time is all filled, we just can't even think clearly.
Yeah, and we lose our ability to be creative, and all kinds of bad things start happening. And so our culture sends us some really skewed and unhealthy messages, I think, about rampant consumption.
So, Angie, how is it that we can move from the idea of rampant consumption? The way to happiness is to consume and fill it up with good things. How do we move from that to a faithful way that a disciple of Jesus Christ would consider these questions?
I think there are a couple of different ways, and we're addressing these in the month of October in Step by Step. There's a brochure that we passed out in worship the first week in October, which is also available on our website for you to print out, and it's also available every Sunday on the Step by Step table out on the patio that gives some very specific practices about how we can be intentional about the way we relate to our possessions. So following one of those activities or any others that you might find helpful that you've thought of, to just be intentional this month in examining how we relate to our possessions. And then, of course, what we talked about at the beginning of Step by Step is that we are called to live immersed in the culture of the 5 foundational principles or 5 foundational steps: Scripture and worship and keeping the Sabbath holy and becoming a part of a regular prayer life, all of this within the context of a faith-filled covenant community. This is what brings us joy, and this is what calls us to live in a healthy relationship with our possessions.
The very first commitment that we're invited to make in Step by Step is this: to present ourselves to God. And in Romans 12 it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds, so that you might discern what is the will of God." We want to discern together what the will of God is as we, disciples of Jesus Christ, understand how to relate to our possessions. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you on Sunday.